what you gonna do tonight? I've got my mama's car keys and you've got a ticket to ride.
Hello, and welcome to Your Favorite Flick, a podcast where each episode we celebrate a movie that my guest loves. We aren't here to be critics, we're here to be fans. A special note to start today's show: my friend Richard Bates, who so generously provides our theme music, has a new album out called Bates and Sons and Daughters, a lovely collaboration with his children. We'll include a Bandcamp link to the album in the show notes. I could say that you should spend the $5 to support Richard, but really you should buy it because if you are human, it will warm your heart. Today I am joined again by Brad Coffman to talk about an obscure little indie called Ghostbusters. Maybe a few of you have heard of it. This one is a straight-ahead comedy of the highest caliber, and we talk about it in that vein. What made us laugh and why, the incredible characters and performances, and what this movie got right in its storytelling and choices. I hope you enjoy. All right, Chief. Well, welcome back to the show. You're a two-time guest here. So we already heard your whole story as a movie fan. We don't need to get into that again. Tell me about Ghostbusters. When did you first see Ghostbusters, and how many times do you think you've seen it over the years?
Wow. I saw Ghostbusters in the theater. I have seen Ghostbusters in the neighborhood of maybe 30 to 40 times. It's embarrassing. Not only would I never not watch it if it was on television, but we did tape it, and it was a go-to. I even loved the cartoon. It was full-on love affair from the start.
We were the right age for that. We were like 7 when this came out. So, man, the fact that there was the real Ghostbusters cartoon, I think the next year, hey, it's just living up the fun times again.
Oh my God. And the Halloween outfits. I have memories of playing Ghostbusters with a couple of friends, which is as lame as it sounds. But no, this movie was a instant cultural superstar.
For any of our younger listeners, it's hard to explain just how big Ghostbusters was. I think it was the biggest hit of the year. The box office kind of shows that, but the song was everywhere. Everything
my
about it
God.
was everywhere.
Oh my God, the song. I mean, the song, if you didn't love that song, you weren't even alive. If you had a Ghostbusters sticker on any part of your school gear, that was major points. If you had the fucking lunchbox, forget about it. I'm trying to think of giant movies like Avatar. I would say Avatar was a huge, huge movie. I don't know what the outlets are these days for fandom, but Ghostbusters was on par with, it was the comedy Star Wars.
Yeah, that is well said. I think these days, a lot of that's moved online, and there's less of a monoculture. So, like, something like Avatar is huge across a lot of groups, certainly. You mentioned kids. People had Ghostbuster stickers on their cars. Adults, not even just teenagers. It was massive.
Yes. When you mentioned what is your favorite flick, this was the first one that came to my mind. And there's so many great movies out there. But this one, once I thought of it, it was absolutely, this is my pick.
I've got a deep probing question for you. You're really going to have to dig on this. How much of your personality is based on Peter Venkman?
Dear Lord, you know, this is the danger of bringing children to movies. I would say I intentionally shaped as much of my personality around Venkman as somebody at that age could possibly do, to the detriment of authority figures, friends, anybody that came in contact with me. It was sarcasm almost from start to finish. And I wouldn't say blame, credit Bill Murray's character and, of course, the writing. Well, actually, I say the writing. I believe he improvised a great deal of that movie. But I absolutely credit watching Ghostbusters at that age.
He does get credit for improvising a lot, which I'm sure he did. Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis were the writers, so a lot of it was improvise. Oh, we'll go back and write this down and then reshoot from what I've read about it. So just a great collaborative process there throughout the project. You feel that on screen. The fact that they're partners off screen informs what happens on screen as well, in my opinion.
They couldn't have casted it much better. I hate to always run to that, but Egon, Harold Ramis's guy, is just perfect. The movie works so well with those three. Winston is a fun fourth. I think the movie would have been fine without him, but I did like having him in there. He gave it an appeal to the everyman. It's not just these three university scientists running around. It's the three university scientists and Winston. So there's a little something in there for everybody.
I, I'm glad you mentioned that, because one thing I've really thought about as I've gotten older with this film, and look, like you, I've seen it too many times to count, but is that Winston, along with Dana, Sigourney Weaver's character in Winston, played by Ernie Hudson, they both kind of ground what is a pretty ridiculous movie in a lot of ways. Like, at least make it that there are some real people in this world.
I mean, Rick Moranis doesn't help that cause, but yes, that's a good way to look at it. There needed to be something to keep this from just being so farcical. Even Animal House has the dean. It was a good thought that they did have somebody or characters in there that kind of grounded it. Walter Peck, the douchebag, he's also the straight guy and the mayor. But yeah, there's very minor roles in the movie. Sigourney Weaver pretty much is the only thing that keeps that movie on the rails for the first half. And then when Winston comes onto the scene, she has a little help. Part of what I love about that movie is it is start to finish sarcasm and just absolute disregard for the consequences of what's going on, which is comical in itself. In the mayor's office, Venkman face to face with the mayor of New York City, who could end his existence theoretically and physically and had him dumped into a lake, gives him, if we're wrong, nothing happens. We'll go to jail. We'll enjoy it. But if we're right and we can beat this thing, Lenny, you would have saved the lives of millions of registered voters. That right there is my favorite part of the movie. And there's a lot of them, but there's something I just love about that. Like, way to get to the heart of what this guy is going to care about. The EPA is talking about this. There's the fire marshal talking about that. The cardinal is there. You have all of these departments with all of their experts, but what it really came down to was you'd get reelected if we can fix this.
Right,
You
this
might
is an
even have a
instant
run.
landslide.
Yeah, you could easily take governor if you wanted it, and this could potentially launch you into the White House. I mean, let's just be real. Saving New York City would be a big feather in your cap. So I love that he appeals to the vanity, not the science. And really, he's such a poor scientist throughout the movie. It starts with him and his made-up game where he's just shocking the nerd for fun and not shocking the hot blonde because he's trying to sleep with her. It just sets up his character for the whole movie. Really, there is no serious moment. That's one of the things I love about his character. There is not one legitimate, heartfelt anything.
So you clocked this for me last night. We try not to talk too much about the movie beforehand, but you did shoot me a text about this, that he essentially doesn't have a not funny line. Venkman doesn't do any setup anywhere. He just is always there to bring the heat.
If there is a serious line, it is part of a funny comment. Like you have to cherry pick individual words out of his comments and be like, his use of the words and if in this were said rather straight. But
Yeah, I was thinking about, he says to Dana, have dinner with me Thursday night, which is not in and of itself funny, but he sandwiches that between two funny lines.
and then as she's leaving, and he's like, "I'm sorry I didn't get to meet you, sir."
So I think you watched this twice this week. What are some of your other observations? What are things you took notes on or really thought about, maybe that you hadn't thought about as much before with this one?
Well, I decided to watch it a third time after I smoked a joint, and I recommend that. And that's when I took all of my notes, and I understood all but one of them this morning. There were several things that I didn't realize, or I remember not realizing the first time I saw it because I was just too young. I did not appreciate that Ray takes a third mortgage out on his house at 19% interest. And I remember I watched that in the theaters with my brother and my dad always has been in real estate. And I remember him just falling out of his chair at that part. So I knew that there was something there that was supposed to be funny, but I just didn't grasp that at the time. Also, when Venkman takes Dana to her apartment and, he's making these comments like, nice place, lots of space, just you? Good. Or, that's the bedroom, but nothing happened in there. What a crime. These are things that I missed completely as I was younger.
First of all, I feel like we should mention here there's a ghost blowjob scene in this movie, which,
Which I did get,
well,
just
that,
because there was the unzipping of the pants. I didn't realize exactly what was going on, but I did get that this was something naughty.
my impression is that you could not do that joke in a family film today the way you could then.
That is probably correct.
As two non-parents, we're probably not the best people to comment on that, but I'm going to go ahead and make that supposition.
A couple of other things. I started to pick this up, but it was only after I'd probably seen it 20 times. When they catch the ghost in the hotel, their first real client with the potential of actually getting them some sort of income. Right before they go to this job, they're talking about being out of money. Egon is signaling to Venkman how much money these things are going to cost. When Venkman says, okay, let's talk serious now for the entrapment and blah, blah, blah. If you look at Egon, he's kind of scratching his nose, but using his fingers to signal how many thousands of dollars they're going to need to charge.
I've never
That
noticed that.
really, oh my God, you're going to have to rewatch it then. It's clear when you see it.
I think that kind of thing really speaks of what partners these guys are, that he would just know in that moment, clock what Egon's doing to give his answer. These are guys who have known each other for years, worked with each other, granted not as Ghostbusters, but worked with each other at the university. The big thing is Peter can read these two weirdos in
Yes.
a way that not many could.
Anything that had to do with Ghostbusters for a couple of years was just instant gold. This almost could be construed as an SNL skit that just took on a life of its own and became a movie. It's very fast paced. Aside from scenes where they just do a montage and you have Casey Kasem in the background giving his radio spiel, you assume that several weeks pass. Winston Zedmore, when he's talking to the mayor, says, I've only been with these guys for a few weeks. So that kind of gives you some timeline, but it's amazing how fast that movie does move.
The montage is something I definitely had in my notes, and I'm right with you. That one big montage saves this movie a whole act, basically, of us having to see the Ghostbusters move up in the world and get famous. Pacing is so on point. If this is a 2 hour and 15-minute movie, yeah, there's a lot of laughs in it, but it's not a classic because
Mm.
you would not feel that rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat all the way through. A couple other 80s elements struck me, in part because it's something we both have some experience in. This is in part a comedy about starting a small business.
And it's people taking a chance, people getting kind of thrown on their ass and coming up with the least sensible path forward. Because if you're a professor and you get thrown out of a university, you start looking at other universities, or maybe you have to go teach at a lower level or a community college or something. You don't decide to start this Ghostbusters thing based on the one ghost they saw in the library. It's a startup business in a startup industry. Pretty unbelievable now that you put it in that form.
Mention the mortgage scene. I need to mention in that scene the fact that he tells Venkman, "You didn't even negotiate."
Yeah. Don't worry, the franchise rights alone will make us millions.
A very 80s line right there, too, franchise rights.
Yeah.
Um, You mentioned the library, so I want to get into that because the library, and there are a couple of other scenes that are genuine scares in the movie. And I'm
Yes.
wondering how you think that functions and how it informs what is a movie that's obviously 90% a comedy.
Scary is a relative term. I wasn't scared because even by that point in the movie, it was clearly a comedy. The ghost turning into the ugly ghost and, scaring them, I didn't find really even pace quickening.
So
Even at 7.
well, let me say, I agree with you on that one. I'm actually talking about the very opening scene with Edna Beavers, where we don't actually see the ghost, but we get her walking and the books move, the index cards start to fly. Maybe scary is strong, but I think that's hugely tension building at the very least.
It really was, and it's so counter to the rest of the movie. That was a very odd start. I remember thinking, what exactly are we getting into here? Because that was the opposite of what I was expecting when I went to the theaters. And it's not even that I saw that much previews or anything, but my dad had said, "Oh, this is a comedy. You're going to love it. It's funny." And then it starts with this, and I'm like, "Oh, shit." You know,
I think part of what it does is sets real stakes for the movie because we're talking about a movie that, as we've already referenced, doesn't really have dramatic scenes per se. But us knowing, like, right off, okay, ghosts are real. Like, even though we don't see it, we see its effects. So it's very clear that there's a haunting happening here and that this is terrifying this woman to the point that we later find out she's laying on a table, shaking in fear. It does provide some meaning behind what's going on and what they're doing.
it legitimizes the movie. I mean,
Right.
without that scene, this goes from a comedy to almost untenable make believe.
It feels like we then have a whole start, even when we first see them. Oh, are these guys doing anything real? And even if we get to the ghost in the very next sequence, I think that hurts the movie. I think it's great that we don't have any moment of are ghosts real in this world? Or are the Ghostbusters crazy or conning people? We know right from the start. Oh, there's something that when these guys become Ghostbusters, which we're guessing is going to happen from the title,
Right.
there's a real threat.
It was a smart way to start. The alternate thing they could have started with would have been Vegman and the two students doing the psych exams. That would have launched this as all comedy with no underlying seriousness whatsoever. The opening scene sets that up. The scene in the kitchen with the eggs and Dana, that's a serious scene. Dana's not in there as a comedic presence. But you're like, oh, yeah, wow, this is really freaky.
And what one thing I wanted to get to too, and perfectly illustrate it in that scene, is how many great effects there are in this movie that are almost like stage magic type effects. The thing with the eggs, that's not digital special effects, obviously. They had some way to do that or to make it look real. And there's just a lot. There's some claymation and stuff, but there's a lot of those effects that are like, oh, they did something practical here. That's really cool. I'm wondering how those hit you, especially watching it all these years later.
I still love it. And I'm glad you brought up the effects. I do remember being pretty awed by the effects when I first saw it. And it stuck with me when they kick the trap in the hotel and they first catch their ghost, which they've already gotten the special effects of the proton packs and the guns or whatever they call them. They kick the trap and it has this lightning, and I remember thinking, like, that they even thought to do that is so cool. Like, they
Right.
didn't have to that was not easy to do in the '80s.
No,
And, yeah,
it's
it
all
just
so well thought out from an effects standpoint. It doesn't feel like just showing off, I don't think, at any point. It enhances what's going on.
absolutely. These days, those effects wouldn't even count as special effects. A high schooler could do that with a computer,
Yeah,
but
you're right.
that was real. That was awesome. Star Wars obviously was one of the first just OMG special effects movies in my lifetime, but no, Ghostbusters special effects were excellent. They were well done, well planned, and I even to this day, get a little excitement when they kick that trap. And it just, I don't know what it is about that scene. Every time I see it, all 3 times in the last 48 hours that I've watched it, I just love that they did that. And it it just illustrates the care that the special effects guys had when they were putting this movie together.
I'd put maybe only Men in Black there in terms of special effects enhancing a comedy the way it does.
Absolutely.
What an interesting thing. You mentioned the proton packs there in the trap. One thing I was thinking about last night that I hadn't thought about quite in these terms is it's very interesting to me that they are fighting supernatural evil, but they are using nuclear technology to do it. Uh,
I don't know how long before there was Chernobyl and or 3 Mile Island, but we are talking about the Cold War. We are talking about nuclear being incredibly misunderstood. I think that that still is an issue, but in the 80s, it was something that you're not to ever mess with. And these guys have backpacks that are essentially nuclear reactors. They pick something that the average person wouldn't be likely to analyze or break up and try to focus on how. But everybody understood enough about nuclear that, oh, well, if anything could do it, nuclear could do this.
yeah, that's
I
a
mean,
great point.
they had to think of something that was familiar so that it resonated. They had to think of something believable, and I think nuclear might have just been the only thing they could find because it was so mysterious back then. And I don't know shit about nuclear power. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a nuclear physicist, but at that age, and even in that time, even adults, most adults, had no idea what nuclear power was about or what he says, why worry? We're each wearing a unlicensed particle accelerator on his back. Nobody knows what particle accelerator did. These days, I think it's a lot more in culture that we do know. Nuclear fit the bill.
It's a very different movie if you do like an Evil Dead type thing where there's like a magic book that deals with the ghosts. It would feel much less go-go 80s. Evil Dead's also 80s, but like you mentioned, the kind of go-go 80s that this movie reflects. I feel like the nuclear option really speaks to that.
And you have no idea how their containment system works, but you do know that Egon developed it. It was developed while they were working at the university. You assume it has some sort of nuclear component. That's something they really generously just gloss over. Similar to the montage, thank God they didn't try to explain it because that would have ruined it.
I think that's got to be in screenwriting one of the most difficult things because I would guess your tendency as a writer is, oh, I'm going to explain this. Like I'm putting this element in. I need people to understand it. And that's got to be hard to tear out in a lot of ways. Okay, there's enough lines about it that we know this is dangerous technology. Don't cross the streams. I just love that this movie has things that are so 80s without them seeming cheesy now. A lot of movies you think of as very 80s, you watch it 40 years later and you're like, ah, okay.
It is a timeless comedy. It's just as entertaining. I watched it 3 times. There's very few movies, even movies I love, that I can watch 3 times within 48 hours. And part of it is because it's a short movie.
Right.
It's not a time commitment. I can do this and my day is still my day. I can and did watched it twice in one day.
A- And I'm going to argue, so I'm just looking right now. It's 105 minutes. It feels like 90 minutes at
It
most,
feels
you
like
know.
45. No, think about it. Go through the movie in your head. It is instant gratification, nonstop laughs, and they don't drag you down some side plot. We're the Ghostbusters. We killed the ghosts, and now there's a big ghost, and there's this jerk who works for the government who's trying to thwart us, and now we get to the big show.
Put a pin in the jerk because we're going to come back to him in just a minute. One thing I really clocked this time is it goes right from that amazing scene in the mayor's office that you mentioned to the army and the police being ready for them to head out to take on Gozer. There's no
Yeah,
like preparation in there. It's just somehow the troops have been gathered as soon as they step out.
And you gotta love that they can't use the elevator and they have to take the stairs. Let's take everybody down a notch. But they're the Ghostbusters and the National Guard's deployed and everybody's out there to see them. And then you just see them dragging their asses up 40 flights of stairs with equipment. I could only imagine it's such a human, normal thing that they put in there to just remind you that these are just still beer drinking, pizza eating dudes. It just worked perfectly. And again, they didn't drag that out either. They cut to them in the stairs and then they get to the hallway. Then they add the end of the hallway in there as a little jab of you're not there yet.
It's a bold choice in that in such a quick moving movie, they intentionally kill momentum for a minute there. I mean, there's still a couple funny lines, but the rah rah rah, oh, we're stopped essentially by these stairs. I think it's a good breather right at that point.
Because otherwise it would have just gone straight into them facing Gozer.
And you mentioned the obvious rooting of this movie in Saturday Night Live. I do think it's good that it wasn't actually a skit because sometimes it might be even too silly if it was born of that. But that said, there's that Saturday Night Live sensibility of like, hey, we're just going to show you in wide what's going on, and we're going to have enough funny stuff going on screen that's going to work.
They do some good work with Bill Murray's facial expressions are as priceless as what comes out of his mouth. They do good cutting those in or cutting to that, not dwelling on it. I think they do all that they need to do to reinforce the comedy and the movie without going overboard.
Switching gears a little bit because you had mentioned William Atherton, who plays Walter. When we had our Midnight Run discussion, which people will have heard, as long as they're loyal listeners, as they should be, we talked about how Farina there isn't really in many scenes. That may be even more true of Atherton here. So why does that character work so well?
Well, first, that poor guy. If I ever saw him in the street, I would assume he's a jerk. What is he? Is he the antagonist? I mean, him and Gozer, obviously Gozer's the bad guy, but he's kind of the antagonist to the Ghostbusters. He's rational, he's grounded, he works for the EPA, he's very questioning of Bill Murray's credentials. He doesn't call him doctor, even after Venkman says, I'm Dr. Venkman. He says, well, what exactly are you a doctor of, Mr. Venkman?
Right.
You know, he doesn't see the Ghostbusters in any legitimate light. So he is the antithesis of Bill Murray. I mean, he works because you hate him instantly. He's what causes everything to go wrong with having the power grid shut down or the power to the building shut off. He's also a grounding figure of this is taking place in real life. There's a real city. There's real consequences. You can't, without a permit, start running around doing stuff. Talk about a small business startup story. Where did the accounting part go? Where did the permitting? You have to register with the state and tell them what business you're in to start a business. So this kind of gives a nod to this is real life. There are real things going on. No, you cannot sit here and suck up 800 kilowatts of power a day from New York City without attracting attention and there being consequences.
It's a way reality intrudes on the fantasy of this movie in a way that enhances the story because it suddenly throws the brakes on this everything's going great part of the movie. How scary is it that apparently all they needed was a power outage, though, to ruin this whole enterprise?
The redundancy systems needed to be checked on that one.
I mean, especially in the city and the country most famous for blackouts, probably historic blackouts.
I'm glad that wasn't thought of because then they would have had to turn off like 3 or 4 things, which wouldn't have been as funny.
Yeah, it would have been anticlimactic, but also I think it sort of speaks to what a shoestring operation this is. Like, even as they're getting successful,
Right.
you know, Janine's their only office employee. They hire Winston without even an interview.
Oh my God. Well, his interview was terrible. If there's a paycheck involved, I'll believe whatever you say. Oh, great. There's exactly the type of caliber we're looking for. That line also brings them down to earth as like, yeah, this is also the 80s. And that mentality is not just in the 80s. That's a mentality throughout time of this is a guy looking for a paycheck. He doesn't believe in ghosts. He doesn't care.
Right.
And that resonates with most Americans.
Though it is interesting, we find out later Winston is religious, and he and Aykroyd have that great exchange with the quote from Book of Revelations. That is one of the few scenes in the movie actually played for drama, and I feel like it's a perfect setup for what we're getting into in the final act.
It's not an accident. It's timed. It's at that transition of, okay, now things are going to start to get serious, in quotes. I mean, never serious, but we're getting to the serious part of this movie.
And the stakes are getting amped up so much. We go in this movie from the stakes are getting fired from your job to the stakes are the end of the world. And we do that in an
Right.
hour and 40 minutes, you know?
Right.
I'm going to make a wild assumption and say Bill Murray's your favorite comedic performance in this movie. This is a tough one, but what other comedic performances stand out for you the most?
Egon. I think
Okay.
I loved Egon's character. I don't have a lot of references to Harold Ramis in movies, and God rest his soul. He did Groundhog Day. No, I'm sorry. He was in As Good as It Gets as the doctor. I think that's the last movie I saw him in.
Well, he did direct Groundhog Day as well. So you're remembering that right. Yeah.
That's why I thought of him in Groundhog Day. But he just plays the straight man next to Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd. That can't be easy.
Not at all. As any good straight man does, he gets some amazing zingers in himself. Just deadpan. I'm not going to quote it exactly right. I am too scared to be capable of rational thought.
Right.
But he just like nothing has changed in him.
Rick Moranis does great as Lewis.
Moranis is my guy in this, and
I thought he
this,
might be.
this is no knock on any of the Ghostbusters, but maybe even over any of them. He's got this oddball, nerdy, but weirdly kind of confident comic energy that I just feel like is something only Moranis has ever had. It's very hard for me to think of other comic actors to really compare to exactly what he could do, not just in this movie, but in general.
And he has a real talent for being annoying and funny at the same time, which
And
isn't easy.
I would say annoying and endearing at the same time too. You basically like Lewis, but he is kind of a pest.
Yeah, but you kind of feel for him.
Right.
And yeah, if I lived down the hall from Sigourney Weaver, I don't know that I'd be any different. But yeah,
Fair
the
point.
party he has, oh my God, where he's like, I invited clients instead of friends. He's a great part of that movie and definitely helps bring it all together. Speaking of watching it with my dad, that was another one of the scenes that he really found much more funny than I did at that age. And it drives home that this man has no social cue. He has no social bearing whatever. I mean, his behavior with Dana is no different than his behavior with everybody. He is just socially awkward in every scenario.
And then once he becomes the keymaster, it's great that he doesn't totally change, but he just becomes so wacky at that point. The handing Egon random items in
Yeah,
in the Ghostbusters HQ, like just so much silly stuff.
I love Janine's line, dropping off or picking up when the police knock on the door. I mean, that says a lot right there about how things are at that office.
Yeah, we didn't
Oh my
even mention Janine, but great use of limited screen time with her kind of deadpan, smartass take on that character.
Her interactions with Egon, I like to read. Egon's like, print is dead. She goes, it's fascinating. Some people think I'm too intellectual.
So we got as far as the stairway. Let's talk a little bit about that final sequence, though, on the roof. How does that work that we then go to horror action, still with funny parts in it, of course? For me, it holds together. I'm curious for you how that whole final sequence works.
It's an absolute 180 for me. The roof scene overall, it holds together because they inject enough funny to keep it going. Egon gives his plan of crossing the streams and says, there's definitely a very slim chance that this will work. And otherwise, you're all dead. And Venkman goes, I love this plan. I'm excited to be a part of it. Let's do it. They keep it going with that, but it is after that scene, you then see them start to line up. And It's the most serious point in that movie, in my opinion. Nobody's smiling. Nobody's laughing. Venkman looks at Ray and says, "It's been good working with you, Dr. Spangler," or
Yeah.
something to that effect. That really drives home the severity of what's going on.
And of course, it ends up being like the poster and promotional shot. But the fact that it is the four of them just lined up in a row like that, with everything we've
Mhm.
seen before, it's instant iconography.
It's instant iconography. It lends itself to the solidarity of them. Nobody's running for cover. If I were Winston, I would have been gone. One of my favorite lines, he says, "This isn't worth 11.5 a year." Your God. There, that puts a timestamp on that movie.
But
But
just
yeah, they
clear that
all
even in the
four,
80s, that wasn't a lot,
I imagine, all four of them lined up, ready to do what they need to do. I think that is, for me, 180 degrees from the rest of the movie. It works well. It's a good way to end it. They throw in some romance at the end with, Venkman gets the girl. Moranis is fine. He just says, "Who does your taxes?" When they're like, "Yeah, we're the Ghostbusters." He's like, "Oh, okay, that's cool. Who does your taxes?" It's the climax of the movie. They had to finish it, but I don't think that they could have made it funny. I think it really would have messed up if they were any more funny than they were.
I hear you on that. I also really like, we've talked about efficiency a lot. I've also really liked that if you time it, it's pretty quick. Like, one thing that's funny, they barely fight the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, right? Like,
Right.
they shoot at him once, he's climbing up the building, and now it's like, oh, we have to do something. There's a nice sequence of him going through the streets, obviously, but I shouldn't say just nice. There's an amazing sequence of him going through the streets. And then they're aiming at the portal. It's the Star Wars ending, right? That you're shooting the main port, but not a lot of run up to that, not a lot of battle directly with Gozar. Just we know what to do. It's a huge risk to do it, and we're gonna act on it.
And they got a nice little comedy moment in there when Venkman goes, "We're going about this all wrong. This guy's a sailor. He's in New York. We get this guy laid. We don't have any problem."
This is so much a New York movie. We both traveled a little more as we've gotten older. I wonder what you think about that. Both some travel to New York, but also just culturally what New York is, how this plays as a New York movie.
There's some snapshots of the guy getting in the taxi cab that's like, "Hey, you're in New York, taxi driver's a ghost," a hot dog vendor thing. What really drives New York home and what really makes New York the best place for this is the crowd that comes to watch them go into the building and kind of celebrate with them. Only New York has such a wide range of cultures that they needed New York for this to be a movie for all cultures. Everybody cared. This is the end of the world. Everybody cares. Everybody's out cheering these guys on. And New York is the best city to have, quote unquote, everybody, because they do.
And then reflect it in the audience for this movie. We kind of led with this. We don't need to belabor it, but everybody saw this movie, and that was across age lines, ethnic lines. You know,
Absolutely.
I can tell you, I subjected my grandmother to this movie, probably both my grandmothers, and it's not something they probably would have chosen to watch, but they had a good time. How could you not?
The scene where Dana is coming out from her cello practice, I assume that's somewhere famous in New York or some famous fountain.
I believe that's at Lincoln Center. I'm not
Okay,
100% sure, but it's
that would make
definitely at
sense.
one of the big cultural, halls in New York.
Fun fact for those listening who don't know this, the firehouse that they shoot as their headquarters, that is on every New York tour
Yeah.
of like must see. Like that is even today, that is how big this movie was. It is a functioning firehouse. You don't get to walk around it just to go say that you saw the building that they used to shoot the scene of the building. It's a thing. It is an amazing, just masterpiece.
One final thing I was thinking of, because it brings together what we're talking about here with the efficiency. I love the decision to make the big celebration at the end, which had to be really expensive to film, right? With all those extras and everything, to play that under the end credits. So, like, We know we're
Yeah.
getting out of there. We don't feel like it's dragging out because we see the credits rolling, but we're getting great celebration. We get a few jokes like Rick Moranis wanting to jump in the car, but being held back by, I think it's a fireman. But I just think that again speaks to, hey, we're going to get you in and out of this movie, but we're not going to shut you off from the celebration of this amazing accomplishment by the Ghostbusters.
That's a good point. They bring you along for the final celebration. They could have very easily just cut it with Venkman walking out with Dana, but they keep it going.
Okay, so we're gonna end in a way that we generally do here. I can't say always because we like to keep this loose enough. But if you're a fan of Ghostbusters, what else should you see?
Well, if you're not a fan of Ghostbusters, then you're not alive. So that's a really tough question. I would say Animal House is probably one of the first kind of just iconic, timeless, funny movies that I associate on the same level as Ghostbusters. Golly, anything with Bill Murray, just any of his comedies will appeal to somebody who likes Ghostbusters. And it's hard to go wrong with Bill.
We hit a few of these already. I mentioned Men in Black earlier. You mentioned Groundhog Day. The first half of Stripes for Murray and Ramis together. That movie unfortunately falls apart after basic training. But if you haven't seen it, if you want to just watch it through the very clear end of basic training, you might enjoy it more. And then the other one I think of is Shaun of the Dead, which is a British zombie movie that really combines humor and horror in a fun way.
God, Shaun of the Dead's a good pick.
All right, Chief. Well, unless you have anything else, that's some great stuff. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Happy to do it.
All right, your second appearance already, and you've given me 2 to 3 more movies that you want to do. So, audience, I think you better get to like Brad, or you're going to have some episodes to skip.
Yep. Sounds good.
All right.
I asked the stars.
That's it for this one, folks. I'm Brad Glazer. I host, produce, and edit the show. The folks helping me make it happen are Chris Bravender, today's guest Brad Coffman, Jeffrey Glazer, and the ghost with the most, Julia Mott. The music you hear at the beginning of the show and now is by my friend Richard Bates and his band The Huns. That's H-O-N-S. You can find The Huns music on Bandcamp. Check them out. And as mentioned up top, check out Richard's new album as well. Huns, take us out.
She spent those 2 weeks cuddling up with the sun.